Hello, my name is Nika Jorjoliani. I am from Redberry. We are a Georgian-based company. We're doing software development for like past 7 years already. And we chose our main stack, PHP, and today I'm just gonna try to kind of like dismantle all the misconceptions about PHP. Okay. So, the title of my talk is PHP is dead and other hilarious jokes. So anybody who's here for the jokes can basically scan this QR code. And if you want to scan, you should probably start already. And we've gathered all the funny jokes that's around PHP, and also like this is good reference of what I'm talking about, because PHP kind of has like a bad rep in the software development community because of how it basically started, so I'm gonna talk about that a little bit as well. I think it's enough time. Yeah, so we get it that the jokes are funny around PHP, and you can see in the 9 gig like a huge meme collection that we created. But I think it's gotten out of hand at this point, kind of, because well, PHP has kind of like a bad start, because the people who basically hated PHP at the time were basically kind of people who didn't really want to get into some kind of older / like not popular technologies basically, and this is what a young developer would see if he or she would try to search some information about PHP on the web. You can see that most of the comments here are kind of negative in a way, but before we go into like talking about each of those suggestions, let's talk about the most important one in the suggestions, and it's why is it elephant? So PHP is elephant because it just looks like an elephant, and this is probably gonna be a little bit more important later. So yeah, this is it. My team kind of told me to smile here, so so why is PHP hated so much? Well, to answer this question, we kind of need to analyze the type of people that hate PHP in general, and we think that there are two main types. And the first type is people who are basically like early adopters, people who like everything new, who love every trendy technology and want nothing to do with PHP or like any older technologies basically. And this kind of attitude toward technology is not new, and it's not just towards PHP. For example, JavaScript had a really bad rap before, but now that you can do basically everything on JavaScript, it's basically went up again for some reason. But this type of people who love everything new, they just don't want to do anything old, and I understand, we're not going to blame them because it's fun to do new stuff, and somebody has to test all the new technologies that roll out basically, so yeah. And this second type of people are what we call the OGs, old gangsters, if you don't catch the reference. So these are type of people who used to write on PHP, but they wrote on basically like older ages, where PHP was prior to PHP 7 or even PHP 5, where PHP had like no basic structure, it had no OP support, and yeah, it was basically a mess. And we understand them because PHP didn't have a great start like any other languages. So we have to understand that when Rasmus, I'm not gonna say his last name because I'm gonna butcher it. So this guy created PHP, and he didn't intend for it to become the huge thing that it is today. Basically like 70% of the web is PHP at this point. He wanted like a simple templating engine for himself to just track his online website. And when we talk about PHP, he didn't release PHP for like general use. He basically created PHP, made it open source, public, and people started using it. So PHP was released back in 1995, but it was created in 93. So by the time it was released in 95, about 15,000 websites started using PHP in the first year, and about 40 in the second year, which means that this was something that people kind of wanted at the time, and nobody probably knew that they wanted this kind of technology. But yeah, when Lefort basically created his own solution to the web at the time, because developing applications on the web was a real hassle. You had to know C basically, and then like we had HTML at the time, but there was no actual way to use HTML or like make it dynamic. So the only way to make it dynamic was like to learn C, then read the files, then replace all the dynamic stuff you needed to replace, which was ugly, of course. And nobody actually did that because it was hard. You need to like control the references, you need to think about the heap, you need to think about the memory. But PHP from the day one was created to be stateless, which means that every new request basically builds the whole application, whole PHP ecosystem, then does the stuff, what needs to be done, and then it's basically like dismantles the whole thing, which means that it's stateless, you can run it on any machine, on any OS, so yeah. And is PHP outdated is another question that I think that is kind of a biggest misconception, because shorter answer is no, it's not outdated, but a slightly longer answer would be that like last decade, basically there's not been a year where at least one major update didn't come out. And those updates are not just updates like bug fixes and stuff, it's improved performance, like a lot of performance improvement. For example, when it was migrating from PHP 5 to PHP 7, there was about 10-fold speed increase on the execution time, which means that, and even PHP 8 is even faster than that, and we're going to see it later. So why is PHP bad, and why is this still actually like a viable question on the suggestions list? Because when we talk about PHP, or when we talk about any technological language or stack or any service, basically, we need to think that it's just another tool for us to use for our business ideas, for technical requirements. So we have to think about it like any other tool, and it's effective in some ways, and it might be ineffective in others. So, for example, like WebSockets, native WebSockets support is not included in PHP because of how PHP is architectured and how it's designed. So PHP is designed to be stateless, which means that every new request is discrete. So like if another request comes in, it doesn't know anything about the previous request, which makes it, it's like curse and a blessing, because that's like what's different with PHP from other languages, but it's also like its downfall. So for example, if you want to use WebSockets in your application, you're probably better be off using some different tools, for example, like Node.js or something. Or you can think of some workarounds. For example, like there are a lot of technologies that use PHP. For example, Laravel has a lot of workarounds using services, but you're probably gonna find like better tools around like WebSockets if you really want it. So, for example, if you want to run process-heavy applications on your backend, if you're doing that on the fly, so every request does something really heavy, it's probably not going to be effective, and you will have to export that basically, or like create some kind of server architecture. For example, like you have front-end servers that basically serve all requests that come in and out from the customers, and then you would have like a different set of servers, backend servers that would serve like processing heavy applications, and that way it's really a viable option to use PHP when you have like a huge applications with like a lot of calculations that are done in the background. But you should try to think of it never to take the process if it's not necessary for like a user to receive the response for his or her request, basically. I wouldn't do big data and ML AI on PHP just because it's possible, because it's a general purpose scripting language, just like Python, for example. And it's possible, but there is not real like resources around web to find anything that is related to big data, so I wouldn't recommend it. And what it's good for, I think PHP's biggest advantage over other technologies is that it's so widespread between people that a lot of people created already ready-to-use services, applications. They basically created businesses over it, and they're like huge ecosystem in PHP, like PHP sphere, which means that, for example, content management tools, if you want to write content management tool for your application, you can basically use PHP's already ready resources around the web and create your like perfect content management tool, because it's the most like why PHP survived this like ugly era, what I talked about before, is because of the content management tools, WordPress. So WordPress was widespread around the web, and they basically like kept PHP alive until a point where developers kind of started to request some good features from PHP devs, and PHP became open source, and like they basically like advanced PHP to this point, just not because of content management platforms, but they started to migrate to like creating actual applications, like for example Laravel does. Laravel is a really amazing framework. If you don't know about it, you should probably research it. And to my next point, rolling out MVPs is a really big one with PHP, just because what I mentioned before. There are a lot of frameworks like Zend, for example, Symfony or Laravel, or like any other frameworks that's out there that follow like modern design patterns. They basically built huge ecosystem of services around them. For example, if you need to set up the mailing system, you don't have to set up your own queues. You don't have to export your own services. You can just use like Laravel's queue service, for example. So you can basically create your MVPs, and like business requirements you can match basically any business requirement when using like already made platforms, and also it makes it easier to customize it. And you probably have to try it out for you to know that it's really true. But yeah, trust me on this one, because we've done about more than 200 MVPs past about 5 years, I guess, and we mainly use like PHP as our main stack, and it works wonders. It's really fast, it's affordable, so I highly recommend it. Scalability on PHP is also a big one. It doesn't get that much talk on the web, like for example, like C# scalability, because as I mentioned, PHP is stateless from the day one, which means that if you design your architecture correctly and you export all your heavy services on the backend servers, and you just have your application that serves users, you can basically scale to no end, because the horizontal scaling is easier on PHP since it's stateless, and like every request can run on any machine, and it's gonna do the same thing, because but the important thing here is that you should try to export your stateful like parts of your application. For example, like static files, you gotta export. You can not have it in the same application, or it's not gonna work. It's not gonna scale. So if you design your application in a correct way, it's gonna scale to no end, and you're not gonna have problems scaling your PHP application. So, is PHP slow? This is also a big one, and I think it's even bigger misconception than outdated one, because actually PHP is one of the fastest scripting languages out there at this point. This is some benchmarking that was done by a third party. I can reference it later, but Python is basically what we think of when we think of like general purpose scripting languages, and that's why I kind of took Python as like a baseline. So PHP 5 was really slow, which means that it was way slower than Python, but PHP 7 is about 3 times faster than Python, and PHP 8 is even faster than that. And it's not compared to C++ or JavaScript. It's of course slower, but like practicality-wise, it's really fast and really easy to basically deploy any kind of applications. But JavaScript is not a real language though, right? So PHP, is PHP dying? That's like the big question, because that's where we started actually. So I think that PHP, I've talked like, I don't know what, 10 minutes about how PHP is not outdated. It's not, it's basically fast as compared to other scripting languages. And it's, well, like, it built a huge ecosystem. It follows all the modern design patterns. They try to keep up with the modern development standards and practices. For example, PHP didn't even have proper security measures in place when it was like prior to PHP 5, because nobody really thought that it's gonna be so widespread and everybody would use it. But since it's open source, it basically fixes all its bugs and patches its updates like really fast, because the community kind of is what drives PHP to become better. So I'm not gonna give you like a standard answer about PHP, and I'm not gonna say that like 75% is like web is still PHP, even though I just did that, but and I'm not gonna give you like some philosophical quote about like how PHP, like nothing is dead if it's still progressing or something, but I'm gonna say that elephants live about 70 years, 65 years, so PHP is about 28. It's just the beginning, guys, so thank you. And yeah. So consider PHP for your next application, and yeah. And if you know anybody who's good developers on PHP, you can ask, like, come talk to me. We're gonna find some jobs for you guys, so see ya, thank you, bye-bye.